Friends, welcome to this lecture series on debates in Indian politics. So, we are for the last couple of working days talking about the theme how to approach Indian state, how to study the Indian state, and what are major theoretical perspectives about looking and studying the Indian state. So, we have this far studied Partha Chatterjee, Sunil Kilnani, and friends, this lecture is a very dominant theoretical perspectives about the Indian state offered by Sudipta Kaviraj. So our today's reading is Trajectories of the Indian State, Politics and Ideas. That is the book Trajectories of the Indian State, Politics and Ideas. It was a 2010 book written by Sudipta Kaviraj. And friends, our reading is the second chapter. Reading is second chapter titled On the Enchantment of the State. On the Enchantment of the State, Indian thought on the role of state in the narrative of modernity. Indian thought on the role of the state in the narrative modernity. I hope you are all attending this class after reading all the Unit 1 reading files I have already uploaded on the Google class. Without reading the files I have shared, you won't be able to understand my lecture in this class because this is a text-based lecture. So understanding the text is very important to understand my lecture. That is one of the basic prerequisite of attending my classes. And friends, I hope you might have come across On the Enchantment of the State, Indian thought on the role of the state in the narrative of modernity. And friends, in this essay, it's basically an essay. Previously, it was a lecture delivered at the Columbia University by Sudipta Kaviraj. Later, it was incorporated into his book, Trajectories of the Indian State. And this is the second chapter of that book. And friends, he is trying to present before us a theoretical evolution of the concept of Indian state. He's trying to present before us a theoretical evolution of the concept of Indian state and how a student of political science can theoretically understand the nature of the Indian state, the role of the Indian state, different perspectives about the Indian state, and thereby we are in a position to understand where do we stand today. So that is the crux of that, reading file, friends. And in this essay, Sudipta Kaviraj created four parts. The first part is dealing with his idea of pre-modern Indian state. Pre-modern Indian state. The second part is dealing with the Islamic state in India, the Islamic state in the medieval Islamic state in India. And the third part is dealing with modern state in India. And the fourth part is dealing with two dominant strands of intellectual tradition, which had contrasting and opposing views of a modern Indian state. Two contrasting views on modern Indian state. So this is the 4-part essay by Sudipta Kaviraj titled On the Enchantment of the Stage. Enchantment means pleasure seeking or something that is pleasing, that greatly admired and greatly interested. That is the literal meaning of the word enchantment. So he was telling us that why the Indian intellectuals, on the whole, loved the idea of a powerful modern state in India. Why the Indian intellectuals were interested in the idea of a modern, very powerful state in India. That is the way in which he is going to tell you about the Indian state. And friends, he begins his essay by telling you that modernity brought the idea of state to India. That was the premise of his essay. Modernity brought the idea of modern state in India. I hope you may be able to understand the literal meaning of modernity. Without understanding modernity, you won't be able to understand its connection with the idea of modern state. So he was premising his essay on state by arguing that the idea of a modern state came to India through modernity. That means, of course, modernity was a route to the idea of a modern state. Imagine if there were no modernity. You just think, you just introspect, friends, whether India would have a modern state, whether we had no touch with the colonial Europe. Friends, do you think that India would have a modern state? So very interesting theoretical question, friends. This is one of the important preoccupations of political science discussions in the Indian academia. Suppose if Britain never came to India, suppose the European colonizers never come to India, friends, have you ever thought whether we would have a modern state like the one we had now, hadn't there been European colonialism in the Indian subcontinent? So, very interesting question. That's why, friends, it is presumed that modernity came to India through European colonialism, and along with modernity, Europeans also brought the idea of a modern state. Otherwise, our state was, our pre-colonial state was, or our pre-modern state was, or our state before European colonialism was something very different. You cannot say what existed in India before the Europeans arrived here was something like a European state. You cannot say it was a European state. And Sudipta Kaviraj is going to tell you what exactly was the idea of state in India before the arrival of European colonialism. So it's an interesting theoretical exploration, right? Am I correct? So he is going to tell you, friends, the reader, you just imagine what would have been, or what were the basic premises of, basic characteristics of political order that prevailed in India before European colonizers landed in the Indian subcontinent? Interesting question. And Sudipta Kaviraj has his own idea about this. And he presented that before the Europeans arrived in the Indian subcontinent, friends, we had two dominant notions of state. We had two conceptions of state. And in this essay, he has subtitled it as Two Conceptions of the State. Two conceptions of the state. And friends, let us understand these two conceptions of state which existed in our part of the world before European colonizers arrived. The first, we had a pre-modern state. Friends, of course, we had a pre-modern state. We had a pre-modern state. And he emphasized that. We had a pre-modern state. And the sources of that pre-modern state, you can find out. The existence, the evidences, the proof for a pre-modern state in India, primarily from Manusmriti and also from Arthashastra. So Manusmriti and Arthashastra have provided foundation for a pre-modern Indian state. A pre-modern Indian state can be found in the Manusmriti and the Arthashastra. And Manu, the Indian lawgiver, the Hindu lawgiver, Manu conceived a single royal form of state, a single royal form of state, a single royal form of power. And Manu does not refer to the republican traditions of Hindu and Buddhist antiquity. When I tell you, friends, the republican traditions, you should be aware of what does the word republican tradition means. So you are a students of governance and politics, so I assume that you are all aware of the word meaning of republican tradition. So Manu, according to Sudipta Kaviraj, does not refer to the republican traditions existed in India. Republican tradition existed in India. For example, in Ramayana, Lord Rama used to walk across the street to understand people's mood about his governance. And after he had brought back Sita from the capture of Ravana from Sri Lanka, he walks across the street and happens to eavesdrop the talks in a family of a laundry worker. And the laundry worker is telling his wife that I am not a Rama to receive you back after you have went to somewhere else without my permission, or you went to somebody's house and came back to my house, and I am not a Rama to receive you back. So Upon hearing this, Rama was sad and he finally decided to leave Sita into the forest. So, friends, in a sense, you can find out that a republican tradition, that the king or the ruler is making decisions upon the mood of the people. That's a Roman republican tradition. That mood of the people is very important in taking decisions, political decisions. So, Kaviraj opines that, but Manu, the Indian lawgiver, only talks about a royal form of political power. He does not talk about a republican tradition of Hindu and Buddhist antiquity in India. In chapter 3, in sloga 3 of chapter 7, in sloga 3 of chapter 7, Manu presented a Hobbesian picture of the Indian state. A Hobbesian picture of the Indian state, Kaviraj opines. And according to Kaviraj, in the Manusmriti, the locus of sovereignty was in the Danda. The locus of sovereignty was in the Danda, not in the person of the king, but in the Danda. So Danda is the source of immense power in Hindu philosophy. Danda is truly the source of immense power in Hindu political philosophy. And you can also find the sources of pre-modern state in the writings of Chanakya, who wrote the famous book Arthashastra. However, friends, Kaviraj has an accusation against the nationalistic leadership in India, who suggested that books like Manusmriti, Arthashastra, and Shanti Parva of Mahabharata were similar to the European literatures on politics. Manusmriti, Arthashastra, and Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata were similar to the European literatures on political philosophy, in which these literatures were seemed to advising the kings on his daily conduct. So, most European literatures on statecraft advises the ruler on daily conduct, and the traditional Indian nationalistic leadership simply compared Manusmriti, Arthashastra, and Shanti Parva of Mahabharata with those literature and argued that we had the same literature. But Kaviraj had reservations on that style of argument. Kaviraj has reservation on that style of arguments. But anyway, he has the opinion that India had a pre-modern state, the sources of which comes from Manusmriti, Arthashastra, as well as epics and Puranic literatures. You can find out the evidences of the pre-modern state existing in India from these literatures. That is one version of the pre-modern Indian state. Then he goes on to another form of Indian state during the medieval period when India had Islamic State. And Kaviraj agrees that Islam and Hinduism contained antithetical principles. There is no any kind of similarity between Hinduism and Islam. They are religions quite antithetical in its core principles. For example, about idolatry worship, Islam doesn't believe in idolatry worship. And about the nature of God also, Islam and Hinduism does not agree. But friends, when it comes to government, when it comes to state power, both Islam and Hinduism hold same premises. They had surprisingly similar laws, similar rules. And you know, Islam is a religion of book, Quran. And Hinduism is not. Hinduism is not a religion of book, but Islam is a religion of book. And everything is being written in book, and the followers should adhere to the rules in the book. And Hinduism is not such a religion, a book religion. And therefore, if you walk across the entire Islamic world, you will find out that the Islamic conception of state comes directly from the book. The Islamic conception of state directly comes from the book. If you go to major Islamic countries of our ancient world or medieval world, friends, you will see that the notion of political power, the sources of political power comes from the book, Quran. But friends, Kaviraj argues that the kind of Islamic state which was founded by the Mughals in India, the kind of Islamic state which was founded by Mughals in India was quite different from most of the Islamic state you could find in the rest of the world. And the Mughals, who founded a powerful Islamic state in the entire South Asia, followed a theory of rule, followed a theory of politics drawn from Persianate Islam, Persianate Islam. And Persianate Islam developed theories of politics from circumstances in Khorasan, Khorasan, Khorasan. Unlike the rest of the Islamic world, friends, Kaviraj is arguing, in Khorasan, it is argued that a highly developed Islamic society, which is, following, Islamic rules in its private life, and a highly developed Islamic society had to submit to the conquest of non-Islamic rulers also. Even if you are following Islamic rules from the book, in case your ruler is non-Islam, as a developed Islamic society, you should submit to the rules of the non-Islamic ruler. That is what Khorasan says. And using a reading of Aristotle, Islamic intellectuals, argues Sudipta Kaviraj, Islamic intellectuals claimed that the responsibility of the ruler irrespective of his personal faith. Maybe he is a believer or a non-believer. Maybe he is an Islam or a Muslim. So irrespective of his personal faith, was to provide good conditions for human flourishing for his subjects. Human flourishing for his subjects. So the task of a ruler, what is the task of a ruler? A ruler is to ensure that all the subjects under his rule, rule were able to live as human being. You should allow your subjects to live as a human being. And friends, Islamic rule in India applied this principle. That way, the Mughal dynasties in India extended a rule of tolerance to the surrounding Hindu society of their subjects. That's why, Kaviraj argues that this using an Aristotelian interpretation of Khurasan, Mughal dynasty had a comparatively greater toleration of non-Islamic people, or the dominant community of those days were Hindus in India. And the Islamic rulers, the Mughal rulers of India, had a greater tolerance towards their non-Islamic subjects, say the Hindus. That way, Kaviraj argues that we also had a pre-modern state in the medieval Islamic stage. The second, point. And he further moves on to tell you, the reader, a third dimension of the enchantment of the Indian state. That is the modern stage. The modern stage. And he says that colonialism and modern stage are closely connected. However, using certain recent historiography, Kaviraj emphasized that, friends, in India during the 16th century, there was an indigenous strand of modernity existed. An indigenous strand of modernity existed in the 16th century. That even before Europeans arrived in India, there was some kinds of movement towards modernizing the Indian society, giving importance to individual person, giving importance to individual selfhood, rather than connecting individuals with certain pre-modern notions about caste or religion or community. Rather, there were attempts to promote individual selfhood. So, Kaviraj argues that before the Europeans arrived in India, India was experimenting an indigenous modernity. However, all of a sudden, friends, the European arrival in India destroyed it. The colonial British power destroyed it. And soon, Britain arrived in India through the company rule, the East India Company. Through the company rule, when Britain arrived in India, there was considerable shift in social occasions. And he is further going to make a comparison between European colonial state in India and state in Europe. He was saying that, friends, in Europe, state emerged not through modernity. the conditions necessary for the emergence of a state was already evolved. That is, society was developed. Society was mature enough to develop a modern state. You know, Renaissance and Enlightenment, Reformation kind of events in the medieval and early modern world, where the supremacy of the church was questioned. So society was changing. Finally, state evolved. So in Europe, state was organized along with the society, which was going to be increasingly modernized. But in India, friends, Kaviraj emphasizes that India didn't attain a modernity of the European scale. India didn't attain a modernity of the European scale. India didn't experience a renaissance of the European scale. India didn't attain a reformation of the European scale. India didn't attain an enlightenment of the European scale. Or India didn't attain a romanticism of the European scale. What only we heard was that some 19th century social reform initiatives, that is, reforming the religious and certain kinds of social practices in India. That was in the early part of the 19th century. Some kind of reforms. But society was not developed in the scale of European Renaissance, European Reformation, European Enlightenment, European modernity. But friends, all of a sudden, what happened in India? Europeans arrived in our part of the world, and they also brought their concepts of governance, their concepts of, what may be called modern state power, and implemented in India. What happened? There was a conflict between cultural practices and the idea of a modern state. Therefore, we are going to face a problem. What is that? Kaviraj is arguing that without the society being undergone a renaissance kind of situation, without society experiencing an enlightenment kind of situation, without Indian society experiencing a European modernity kind of situation, you have implemented a European style of state in India, but society was not evolved, modern, like the one that existed in Europe. So this contradiction was so rampant in the idea of modern Indian state. And this problem started with the arrival of Europeans. Otherwise, he was saying that by 16th century itself, India was experimenting on an indigenous modernity. But that was broken. That is broken because of our colonial experiences. Because all of a sudden, some European colonizers arrived in our land. And they started implementing some European kind of systems in our part of the world. So, initially, the company was trying to collect revenue on behalf of the empire, but it was not interfering in the local cultural practices. The company was not interfering in the native population's personal lives, but as it established its grip on the Indian soil, the company authority in India began to show state power in the early colonialism era. And British power thereby was consolidated. And British power in India by 18th century when it was consolidated, it established a hybrid political power between an empire state of the older type, and a sovereign state of the modern type. An empire state of the older type and a sovereign state of the modern type. So, Kaviraj argues, friends, British Empire, which founded a colonial state in India, was directly different from the Mughal state, which continued here for centuries. In fundamental ways, the colonial state which was founded in India was different from the Mughal state existed here. So after the rebellion, which according to British historians are Sepoy Mutiny. And Kaviraj tells that it is rebellion. So after the rebellion of the mid-19th century, friends, the character of the colonial Indian state changed. For example, he is telling an example about how the character of the Indian state changed. That colonial state in India had some kinds of thoughts about intervening in local cultural practices, which they call barbaric practices. The colonial state in India began to interfere in the native customs. For example, Britain decided to abolish, William Bentinck abolished Sati practices. And friends, there was considerable debates over this question. Why the colonial state in India abolished Sati? See, okay, you will see that Sati is barbaric, but do you have the legitimacy to abolish a cultural practice of a native population? Because the political power that you enjoy are not native political power, which you have brought here from the European part. So your state is a European colonial state, and that state has passed a law which abolished a native custom. So friends, on this question, Kaviraj discusses 3 strands of argument for your reference to understand the nature of the colonial British state. You see, friends, 3 ideological camps emerged. The first camp supported unconditionally the abolition of Sati practices in India by the British colonial Indian state. So for that ideological camp, it should be abolished. And what the British colonial state did in India was fair. Because Hindu society, according to this camp, was unwilling to abolish this. So what is a rational solution? Because most hardcore Hindu believers are never willing to leave the Sati practice, because they think that it is their custom. A widow should die in the funeral burn of her husband, the funeral fire of her husband. A widow should commit herself a sacrifice and burn herself in the ashes along with her husband. So the native Hindu population is not willing to leave this. So what is the solution? The colonial state should use its power, its political power, to abolish it. But there's a second argument. Some Hindu reformers argued, no, colonial state should not be allowed to do that. You should not allow the colonial state to abolish the sati. Of course, it is a morally abhorrent practice, But this morally abhorrent practice should not be abolished by a colonial state. Rather, it should be eradicated by the Hindu society themselves. The Hindu society should educate itself that it's a morally abhorrent practice and should wipe out these kinds of evil elements from our culture. That is the best way. To allow the colonial state to abolish a native custom is to accept the fact that what you have been practicing for centuries was barbaric. That you, Hindu society, yourself agreeing that what you have been doing for centuries as a cultural practice was barbaric, and your society is not able to understand that it was a barbaric practice. That is why you have let a foreign power to abolish your own native custom. Friends, you are losing your own identity. You should never let the British power to abolish your local culture. This was a nationalistic interpretation of the abolition of sati by William Bentinck. And friends, a third strand of Hindu opinion was that they opposed the jurisdiction of the state to initiate reform. The colonial British state do not have the jurisdiction to initiate a reform in India. And you cannot say the normative practice of sati as a bad practice. It's a normative practice. So this is, this British colonial modernity thinking that sati was barbaric is a normative criticism. No, it should not be looked like that way. It should not be looked at that way. That's the third strand of Hindu opinion about the abolition of sati by the colonial British state. But friends, see, so after the rebellion, the nature of the British state changed. There was confusion over whether the British state should interfere in the native culture or not. But anyway, about this question, about the nature of the modern Indian state, two strands of literature emerged. And Kaviraj is now going to tell you, friends, what are these two strands of literature upon which the modern Indian state is what it is today. He was referring to four important foremost writers. One is Buddhadev Mukhopadhyay, you may refer to the reading, Buddhadev Mukhopadhyay, who was a sociologist. Second, Gandhi. Third, Tagore, and fourth, Nehru. And Buddhadev Mukhopadhyay, a dominant native sociologist, Indian sociologist, Who believed that? Who believed that the modern colonial state in India wasn't able to understand the complexities of the local culture. So there was a total disconnect between local culture or local conscience or the inner mind of India and the modern colonial state in India. There was a tussle between, a conflict between the inner mind of India and the colonial state implemented here. And this problem was so severe that the practice of colonial state in India was counterproductive in a sense, was counterproductive because it didn't pay enough attention to the inner conscience of India. So Buddha Mukhopadhyay argues Western modernity proposed rest of the world was morally indefensible. Rest of the world was morally indefensible. That the West has created certain moral standards, enlightenment, human liberation, liberty, this J.S. Mill kind of liberty, the Kantian concept of self-autonomy. These moral standards are the foundation upon which Western civilization was founded. And this Western civilization is considering that rest of the world, the Chinese civilization, the Indian civilization, the Islamic civilization are indefensible because their culture, the Islamic culture, the Hindu culture, the what may be called the Chinese culture are all weak culture. And upon this conviction, a modern state was implemented in India. And Buddha Mukhopadhyay argues that that was the problem with the modern Indian colonial state. And Kaviraj has referred to that literature. And now Kaviraj is going to understand Gandhi. And friends, Gandhi, for his part, rejected modernity itself. Gandhi rejected modernity, modern practice of medicine, modern practice of government, modern practice of parliamentary institution, bureaucracy, modern state power are all against human autonomy. Western modernity is a bad idea for Gandhi. So that cannot be practiced in India because what we need is a self-government. What is self-government? That is, a government should be established at two levels, individual level and external level. What is government in the individual level? You think that, friends, so long as you are able to control yourself, your thoughts, your desires, your what may be called sensual desires, your material desires, if you are able to control yourself, all these desires, friends, why do you need an external government? Because you are able to control yourself. You are a good person then. You don't need a government at all. Then where do we need a government? We need a government in place where the people are not able to govern themselves. That each individual in the society is not in a position to control himself or herself, that he or she is not able to control his or her own material desires. Such a situation, friends, we need a government, Gandhi argued. So, but European government is all of a sudden implemented in a society where all people are subjected to the state power without giving due attention to the ability or to understand the ability of an individual to self-assess himself or herself. Then the European government or colonial or European state is not paying attention to individual self-autonomy. I am able to control myself. Then I don't need a government at all. Who need government? Those people who don't have the ability to control themselves. This is what Gandhi's position. But friends, this is what also Tagore's position. Tagore also had a same kind of notion, which is more spiritual rather than material. So Tagore had a poor respect for European modernity or Western modernity, and there is a famous debate between Tagore and Isaac Newton. A famous debate between Tagore and Isaac Newton. Clear? So friends, this Gandhi version of modernity and Tagore version of modernity was so dominant. But friends, there were two dominant intellectuals in India also. But Kaviraj argues that the person who really built modern India, the person who gave you all people the freedom that you enjoy now, the person who is credited to have been contributed enormously to all what we enjoy now, who is that? Kaviraj says, it is Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru built modern India. Of course, Gandhi got liberated India from the foreign yoke, but Nehru built institutions. Nehru's India is real India, not Gandhi's India is forgotten. Tagore's India is forgotten. Nobody remembers Gandhi. So everybody loves Gandhi. All the people, communist people can use Gandhi. Sanghavarivar people can use Gandhi. Congress people can use Gandhi. Even revolutionaries can use Gandhi. Haven't you heard our poets arguing that Gandhi was a revolutionary? Everybody can use Gandhi, but not all people can use Nehru. Friends, Nehru was such a Faustian Western man, a really agnostic individual. A Faustian Western man, agnostic, He was really a modern scientific man. So Nehru built modern India. That is what our Kaviraj argues in his essay. And the modern India was built on by Nehru's perspective. And Kaviraj argues that this Nehru line of thought had great admirers. They all believed that once India get independence, immediately we should establish a modern state. And the modern state in India should be the center of allocating all the resources. You should not allow any religion, any culture, any other identities, any dominant role. All of a sudden, you take over charge and give power to a modern state, and state should oversee everything. That is what Kaviraj argues. And Nehru just did the same thing. He nationalized everything. He practiced import substitution, never practiced export, but import substitution. And he never believed in large-scale industries by private capital, because Indian industrialists, according to Nehru, had that much capital. So Nehru invested heavily in high industries under the control of state power. So for about 2 decades after independence, a Nehru state dominated, which according to Sudipta Kaviraj is Nehru state. According to Rajini Kothari, it is Congress system. But after 2 decades, things again changed. Kaviraj himself argues that regional identities emerged, political Hindutva emerged. That all posed a great challenge to a Nehruvian version of Indian state, a Nehruvian version of politics. And finally, Kaviraj wind up this essay by saying that the Nehru stage is crucial for understanding what is happening in Indian politics today at the current stage. The Congress system fell into decay by 1970s. By 80s, the Congress conception of a pluralist Indian nation was seriously challenged. that a nation of all the people, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and different caste identities, Dalit, an India of plural identities. That was the notion of Nehru. That was the notion of Congress. And friends, in the 80s, this notion was challenged, particularly by political Hindutva. Now there is no a single a Nehruvian notion of plural India, and now a pluralist notion of India is no more. Rather, in its place, an idea of what may be called a nation of a particular identity is being reinstated. This is the trajectory of Indian state, according to friends Sudipta Kaviraj. With this, I am winding up my lecture, friends. The floor is open for discussion.